Chosen one. There is a moment when the ordinary pauses, when something quiets the noise of your day and turns your attention toward a truth you have been circling for a long time without quite landing on it. This is that moment. You did not come here by accident. You were not simply scrolling past a distraction. Something in you recognized that this message was meant to find you, and that recognition itself is worth sitting with. Heaven does not waste moments of interruption. When your spirit stills and your attention is drawn towards something unexpected, it is rarely coincidence. It is preparation. It is the opening of a conversation that began long before you were aware of it. You have been carrying something quietly, a pull toward a connection that does not fit the template you were handed. A sense of recognition when you look at someone whose years are fewer than yours, but whose spirit seems to meet you in a place others never reached. And along with that, pull a familiar weight. What does this mean? Is this real? Is this from God? Or is it simply what I want? Those questions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of discernment awakening. A person who doesn't ask those questions is not walking in wisdom, they are walking in impulse. You are asking because you take your faith seriously, and heaven honors that. This message is not here to silence your questions. It is here to help you hold them more clearly. Because what God is doing in your life right now is not small, and it is not an accident. Before we go deeper, it matters that you understand the ground you are standing on and why the pull you have been feeling is worth examining with reverence, not dismissal. There is something unique about this kind of recognition. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with certainty or with fanfare. It arrives quietly, the way a season changes, not in a single dramatic moment, but in gradual, undeniable signs. One morning you wake up and notice that the light is different. The air carries something new. And even before you can name it, your body already knows something has shifted. That is where you are right now. Not at the beginning of confusion, but at the edge of clarity. You have been standing in a long in-between, not lost, but not yet certain where you are going. And if you are honest, the pull you have been feeling about this person, about this connection, is not something you can simply dismiss or explain away. It keeps coming back. It has a quality to it that feels different from the ways you have felt before. And that difference matters. Not because every strong feeling is divine, but because some feelings are rooted in something deeper than emotion. Some things we sense are not wishful thinking. They are the spirit beginning to recognize what the mind hasn't caught up to yet. There may be people in your life who would immediately question what you are feeling, who would raise an eyebrow at the age difference, who would offer you warnings dressed as wisdom. And some of what they say may even carry genuine care. But if you have been filtering this experience entirely through their lens, you may have been using the wrong instrument. Other people's comfort with your choices is not the same as God's permission for your life. That does not mean you should be reckless. It means you should be discerning, and discernment is exactly what this message is calling you toward. Not blind certainty, not impulsive action, but a careful, honest, prayerful examination of what is actually happening. The question worth sitting with right now is not whether this connection makes sense to the people watching your life from the outside. The question is whether it carries something real, something that grows rather than diminishes when you look at it honestly. Because that is where God tends to speak, not in the loudest voice, but in the deepest one. You have been carrying this quietly, turning it over, wondering. And that wondering is not a sign that you have lost your way. It is a sign that you are taking seriously something that deserves to be taken seriously. The soul that asks questions is the soul that is paying attention, and heaven does not summon the attention of those it has nothing to say to. Something is being prepared, something is being opened, and the fact that you are still here, still listening, still willing to examine what you are feeling with both honesty and faith, that itself tells you something about who you are and where you are standing. A new season does not always announce itself with certainty. Sometimes it announces itself with a quiet pull you cannot ignore, a recognition that something ahead of you is different from everything behind you. That is the threshold you are standing on right now. And what you do with that awareness is what everything that follows depends on. Let's be honest about something, because honesty is the only thing that will actually help you here. What you are feeling is not simple. It is layered, and one of those layers is something that many people in your position carry, but rarely name out loud. There is a voice somewhere underneath the pull that keeps asking a harder question, not is this real, but something closer to, am I feeling this because it is right, or because I am tired of waiting for something that never quite arrived? That distinction is not one you should dismiss. It is one you should take seriously. Because you have been waiting. Not just for a person, but for a kind of connection, the kind where you do not have to explain yourself to be understood, where you do not have to shrink to feel safe, where your depth does not become a burden to the person across from you. You have wanted that for a long time. And the relationships you have tried, the ones that looked right from the outside, the ones that matched the template, those did not deliver it. And that is its own kind of wound. Not the dramatic wound of betrayal or sudden loss, though you may have experienced those too. This is a quieter wound, the accumulated exhaustion of being with someone who was close to right, but not quite there. Who cared, but not in the language your soul speaks. Who stayed, but never truly arrived. And somewhere along the way, you started to wonder whether what you were looking for even existed, or whether expecting to feel genuinely met was asking for too much. Then this person appeared, someone younger, someone whose presence does something that the appropriate choices never did. And now you are here trying to figure out what that means, carrying the pull alongside the worry that you are not thinking clearly, that you are feeling this because you are finally tired of the in-between, not because this is actually what God is doing. That worry is not foolish. It deserves a real answer, not just reassurance. Here is what is true about wounds and discernment. An emotional wound does not disqualify your ability to sense what is right, but it can cloud it. It can make the familiar feel safer than it is, or make the surprising feel more significant than it needs to be. What a wound does is add noise to the signal. It does not silence the signal entirely, but it means you have to listen more carefully to separate them. The question is not whether you have wounds. You do. Everyone who has loved and been disappointed does. The question is whether you are approaching this connection from a place of genuine recognition or from a place of emotional fatigue, looking for a shortcut. And the honest way to begin answering that question is to look at the internal landscape when you are with this person, not the first wave of feeling that can happen with anyone who offers something new, but the more settled layer underneath. When the initial excitement quiets, what is left? Is there peace? Is there a sense of being seen that feels stable rather than intoxicating? Or is there mostly the relief of not feeling lonely, which is real but is not the same thing? You may also be carrying a pressure that has nothing to do with this person at all, the pressure of knowing what everyone around you would think. The face of a family member already forming in your mind. The friend who would raise the concern you already know is coming. The community that has certain expectations about what wisdom looks like and what love should resemble. And somewhere in the tangle of all of that, you are trying to figure out what you actually believe. That is exhausting, and it is worth naming, because some of the self-doubt you are carrying is not discernment. It is residue. It is the echo of being told explicitly or implicitly that certain kinds of love are suspect, that anything outside the expected template needs to be defended before it can be lived. And when you have internalized that long enough, you start requiring proof of your own feelings before you allow yourself to have them. The invitation here is not to ignore the questions. It is to get honest about which questions are actually yours and which ones belong to other people's comfort levels. Because not every voice of hesitation is God warning you. Some of them are just fear. And fear, while useful as a signal, is not a reliable guide to what is true. You have done this before, chosen the safe choice, the expected choice, the one that made sense on paper. And you know what that cost you. You are still carrying it. The question is not whether you want to do that again. You know the answer. The question is whether you are willing to stay in the discomfort of honest examination long enough to find out what this actually is and whether it is worth stepping toward. That clarity does not come from forcing an answer. It comes from continuing to look honestly. And that is what the next part of this is for. There is a pattern most people never examine because examining it is uncomfortable. And because you are here still listening, I believe you are ready to look at it. Think back over the relationships you have had, not the ones that were obviously wrong, not the ones where the warning signs were clear from the beginning. Think about the ones that should have worked. The ones with the right age, the right background, the right kind of history, the ones that on paper had everything that was supposed to matter. And ask yourself honestly what was missing. It was not commitment in most cases. It was not effort. You gave those things. In some relationships, you gave them beyond what was reasonable. What was missing was something harder to name, a quality of meeting that went below the surface. The sense that the person across from you could hold not just your good days, but your actual depth. That they could be present with you in the spaces where you are most fully yourself, without flinching, without needing you to simplify yourself for their comfort. That is what you have been looking for, not someone impressive, not someone convenient, someone who could actually carry the weight of who you are and find it worthwhile, not burdensome. And the relationships that match the expected template could not give you that, not because they were bad people, not because you were too much, but because what you were looking for cannot be measured by the number of years someone has lived. It is measured by what those years produced in them, whether their experience drew them toward depth or away from it, whether their wounds made them more open or more closed, whether they became someone capable of presence, or someone who learned to manage distance. Some people spend decades accumulating experiences that leave them less available than when they began. Others walk through a handful of formative seasons and emerge with a capacity for presence that surprises everyone, including themselves. The difference is not time. The difference is what was done with it. This is the hidden pattern. You have been trying to find the right connection by using the wrong criteria. Not consciously, not because you were careless, but because the criteria you were given, age, life stage, common background, are the ones the world hands you, and they are not entirely wrong. They just are not the whole story. The real criteria, the ones that actually determine whether two people can build something real, have to do with what each person carries, whether they have done the work of knowing themselves, whether they have sat with their own pain long enough to stop running from it, whether they can be still when stillness is required, or whether they fill every quiet moment with noise because quiet makes them too aware of what they have not dealt with. Whether they know how to honor something without owning it. When you sit with the person, you have been thinking about the one who is younger, the one whose presence has been creating this pull in you, and you strip away the externals. What do you find? Do you find someone who has not yet done that work? Or do you find someone who has been through their own seasons of difficulty and came out of them with something real? Because their youth is not the question. The question is what they carry. There is a passage in Ecclesiastes that speaks of two being better than one, not because two is more convenient than one, but because when one falls, the other can help them rise. That kind of partnership is not built on similarity. It is built on complementarity, each one bringing something the other genuinely needs. each one capable of receiving what the other offers. That is the standard, not sameness, not matching biography, but the capacity to genuinely meet. Look at what this person brings into a room, not what they bring in terms of accomplishment or credentials. What quality of presence do they carry? Do they make you want to be more honest or more performed? Do they ask questions that reveal how carefully they listen? Or do they fill the space with their own need to be interesting? When they are with you, do you feel steadied, or do you feel like you have to manage them? And equally important, what do you bring into the space you share with them? Do you feel the part of you that has been shut down for self-protection beginning to open? Do you notice yourself laughing in a way that feels unguarded? Do you find yourself saying true things instead of safe things? The pattern that has been running through your relational life is not random. It has been pointing you toward something. Every time the expected choice could not hold your depth, it was quietly revealing what the real requirement actually is. Not a certain age, not a certain life stage, a certain kind of soul. And you are beginning to see, maybe for the first time with real clarity, that the soul you have been looking for might not look the way you expected. That is not a warning. That is an opening. There is something that needs to be said about the years you have spent waiting, not as consolation, not as a way of glossing over how difficult they were, but as context. Because the way you have interpreted those years shapes everything about how you are moving into this moment. If you have read the waiting as punishment as evidence that something is wrong with you or with what you carry, then you have misread it. Not entirely. The loneliness was real, the exhaustion was real, and the moments when you wondered whether this was simply your life, whether closeness was something other people got to have, and not you, those were real too. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. But there is a difference between what the waiting felt like and what it was actually doing. And you cannot understand where you are standing now without understanding that difference. A tree that has been growing through difficult soil does not produce shallow roots. It produces deep ones. The roots go further down because the surface was not hospitable, because the ground did not yield easily. The tree had to extend itself further to find what it needed. And when the storm comes, which it always does, that tree does not fall, because the roots are not skimming the surface. They are anchored in something that goes further than what is visible. You have been that kind of tree, not because you chose it, not because you were stronger than other people, but because the seasons you walked through did not allow for a shallow version of you to survive. They required you to go deeper into your faith, into your understanding of yourself, into the questions that most people never have to sit with because their lives did not push them there. And what you found in those depths, even if you do not always recognize it as such, is the thing that makes what is happening now possible. The person you have been drawn to, someone younger, someone at a different place in their own unfolding, did not have that same kind of waiting. Their roots are not yours. Their formation was different. What they carry came from different seasons than yours, and that is not a deficit in them. It is not something they need to apologize for or work to overcome. It is simply the nature of where they are in the trajectory of their life. But here is what becomes important. Their formation, whatever it has been, has produced something in them that is genuinely drawn to what your formation produced in you. Not out of naivety, not because they do not know any better, but because something in them recognizes, even if they cannot fully articulate it, that your depth offers something they need, a quality of presence, a capacity for stability, a groundedness that does not require constant explanation. And that recognition is not accidental. It is the beginning of a complementarity that actually works not because two people are identical, but because what one person carries is genuinely needed by the other, and vice versa. The book of Habakkuk contains a phrase that is worth holding here: the vision awaits an appointed time, not a general time, an appointed one, specific, intentional, not the time that is most convenient or most expected, but the time that is actually right, which is a different thing entirely. Your waiting was not a void. It was not simply the absence of something good. It was an appointed time in its own right, the time in which you were becoming the person who could actually hold what is being placed before you now, because receiving something well requires a certain kind of formation, and the formation you needed could not be rushed. It could not be manufactured. It required what it required. And what it produced in you, the ability to be present without performance, to love without needing it to fix something in you, to be steady in the spaces where others become reactive, that is not incidental to this moment. It is the reason this moment is possible. This matters because there may be a voice in you that says, I wasted too much time, I am behind, I should have been here already. That voice is not telling you the truth. There is no behind in divine timing. There is only the appointed time, which by definition is the right time, even when it does not look like it from inside the waiting. There is also something worth acknowledging about what the waiting may have taken from you. Some lightness, some ease, some of the unguarded hopefulness that belongs to a person who has not yet been tested in the specific ways you have. You may have noticed that quality in the person you are drawn to, a kind of openness that you once had and then learned to protect yourself from having. And part of the pull is the recognition that this person carries something you have quietly been missing. That recognition is not a weakness. It is an honest observation. What they carry is real. And the fact that it calls something out in you, not because you need to be rescued from your own depth, but because your depth was never meant to be the only thing present that is also real. Preparation does not mean you arrived complete and needing nothing. It means you arrived ready to receive without losing yourself in what you receive. That is what all of that waiting built in you. And now it matters. One of the most important things you can do right now is learn to distinguish between two things that can feel identical in the moment but lead to entirely different places. One is divine leading. The other is emotional need that has found something that fits its shape. Both can produce a strong pull. Both can feel meaningful. The difference is not always obvious from the inside, but it is not invisible either if you know what to look for. The first thing to understand is that discernment is not the same as certainty. There is a version of faith that asks you to feel completely sure before you move, to have all the questions answered, all the doubts removed, all the outside voices silenced before you take a step. That version of faith does not actually exist. And if you are waiting for it before you do anything, you will wait indefinitely, not because God is being unclear, but because certainty at that level is not what faith runs on. Faith runs on evidence, on pattern, on the slow accumulation of what you observe over time. So instead of asking yourself whether you are certain, ask yourself something more useful. What kind of fruit does this connection produce in you? Not the fruit of excitement. Excitement is not a reliable marker of anything divine. It is simply the experience of something that is new and stimulating and meeting a need that was present. Excitement happens with things that are good for you and things that are not. It is neutral information at best. The fruit that matters is different. It is whether this connection makes you want to be more honest, not more impressive. Whether it draws out the part of you that is genuine rather than the part that performs. Whether you feel over time a steady quality of peace, not the absence of uncertainty, but something underneath the uncertainty that holds. A sense that even when you do not know everything, you are standing on ground that is real. That is one marker. Another is whether this person calls you towards something greater than their own presence. True alignment does not make you smaller in the name of partnership. It does not require you to abandon your own calling, your own faith practice, your own sense of purpose, or theirs. If being with this person moves you in the direction of becoming more fully who you were made to be, that is a meaningful signal. If it consistently moves you away from that, the feeling involved is real, but the direction is wrong. There is also the question of what kind of fear you are carrying. This is important because fear is not a single thing. There is fear that serves as warning, the kind that shows up when something is genuinely unsafe, when a pattern is familiar in a bad way, when something does not hold up under careful examination. That fear is useful. It is trying to protect you, and you should listen to it. Then there is fear that is residue, the kind that comes from having been hurt before and therefore experiencing every open door as a potential wound. This fear does not appear because there is actually danger present. It appears because your nervous system has learned that openness leads to pain, and it is trying to keep you in the familiar territory of guardedness. That fear is understandable, but it is not telling you about this situation. It is telling you about the last one. Learning to tell the difference is not always easy, but there is a quality to each that you can learn to recognize. The warning fear tends to be specific. It points to something observable in the person or the situation that triggers the concern. The residue fear tends to be general. It shows up not because of what you are observing, but because of the fact of being open at all. The first letter of John contains guidance that is practical here, not just theological. Test what you are experiencing. Not with suspicion, not with the assumption that it is wrong, but with the kind of attentiveness that honors what is happening by looking at it carefully. Fruit reveals origin. That which consistently produces peace, honesty, growth and movement toward calling, that has a different source than that which produces anxiety, shrinking, confusion, and movement away from who you actually are. One more thing worth naming. The easiest thing in the world is to take a feeling this strong and immediately look for spiritual confirmation, to find the signs that say yes because you want it to be yes. Discernment does not work that way. It requires you to also look at the evidence that would point in the other direction. To ask honestly, if I am being led by need rather than leading, what would that look like? And then to look with real willingness to see. That is not distrust of God. That is the kind of honest examination that reflects how seriously you are taking what you are carrying. And God honors the person who brings their full honesty to the process, rather than asking for validation they have already decided on. This is not a test you need to pass before you are allowed to feel what you feel. It is a practice you engage in because what you are holding deserves to be held well. And the clarity you are looking for, it is coming. But it will come through honest examination, not around it. There is a layer to what is happening here that goes beneath the personal and touches something purposeful. And to understand it, you have to be willing to look at what each of you is actually carrying, not in terms of accomplishment or biography, but in terms of what you have to offer and what you genuinely need. Start with yourself. Think honestly about what you bring into any significant relationship, not the curated version, not what you would say on a good day when you feel at your best. The real inventory. You bring depth that took a long time and cost something significant to develop. You bring the capacity to stay present with discomfort rather than fleeing it. You bring the knowledge that comes from having navigated more than one season of uncertainty and not collapsed under the weight of it. You bring a kind of groundedness that cannot be performed. It can only be earned through the particular education that difficulty provides when you do not look away from it. But you also carry something you may not be as quick to name. You carry weight. Not dead weight, purposeful weight. The weight of experience that over time can gradually close certain doors that should remain open. The part of you that used to take a risk without calculating every possible outcome first. The part that laughed at things that were actually funny instead of assessing whether the laughter was appropriate. The part that could sit with wonder at something beautiful without immediately reaching for explanation. Those qualities did not disappear because you became flawed. They receded because survival required it. Now think about the person you have been drawn to. What do they carry if you have been paying attention, real attention, not the romanticizing attention that projects what we want to see, something about the quality of what they bring. They have not necessarily walked through the same kinds of seasons you have. Their depth may look different than yours, but there is a quality of presence in them, an openness, an aliveness, a willingness to feel things without immediately reaching for the container that will manage those feelings at a safe distance. They carry something that was not manufactured. It arrived through their own specific formation, whatever that has been. And here is what becomes visible when you place these two inventories beside each other. They do not compete, they complete. The quality of steadiness you carry is genuinely useful to someone whose spirit is alive and open, but whose sense of foundation is still being established. Your capacity to remain grounded when things become uncertain is not incidental to them. It is something that allows them to be fully present in the relationship without having to worry that you will disappear when it becomes difficult. Your depth does not overwhelm their openness, it gives it somewhere real to land. And their lightness, their ability to approach life with a quality of freshness that your particular journey may have made harder to access, that is not naivety. It is a genuine resource. It is the thing that enters the room and reminds you that not everything requires bracing, that some things can simply be received, that wonder is still available if you allow it to be. Their presence does not simplify you. It opens a part of you that had quietly been waiting for permission to breathe. Ecclesiastes describes the partnership that actually works as one where each can lift the other when one of them falls, where the presence of the other makes something possible that being alone does not allow. That verse is not describing a relationship between equals in the sense of being identical. It is describing a relationship between two people whose differences make them capable of providing what the other genuinely needs. That is the complementarity that actually holds. The question worth asking now is not whether this connection makes sense according to the template. The template was never the standard. The standard was always whether what is being built serves something real, whether the relationship moves both people toward what they are called to be, whether the exchange between them produces something that neither could produce alone. There are partnerships that look correct on every external measure and produce something hollow. Two people who mirror each other so completely that there is no genuine exchange, only echo. And there are partnerships that look unusual, that require explanation, that raise eyebrows and yet produce fruit that is undeniable. Something in the union between them serves a purpose larger than either one of them individually. What you are beginning to see, and why this recognition feels different from anything you have experienced before, is that this might be the second kind, not because everything is easy or obvious, but because the exchange between you has a quality of genuine complementarity that the expected pairings could never quite produce. This does not mean the relationship is without challenge. Complementarity is not the same as compatibility in the easy sense. It is the kind of fit that requires each person to bring their full self, not a simplified version designed for convenience, but the real thing. And that is always going to require something. But here is what is beginning to emerge. The purpose behind what you are feeling is larger than the feeling itself. And that largeness is worth continuing to examine carefully and honestly, rather than reducing it to something you can explain away. There is a question you may have been asking underneath all the other questions, quieter than the rest, but more persistent. Not is this real and not is this wise, but something more fundamental than both. Why? Why would God connect me with someone younger? What does the age difference actually mean in the context of everything I believe about how relationships are supposed to work? That question deserves a direct answer. Heaven does not connect people based on the number of years they have lived. Heaven connects people based on what they carry and what they are called to do together. That is the standard. Not chronological age, not life stage as the world defines it, not whether the relationship looks conventional from the outside. Assignment, calling, the specific combination of what each person carries and what each person needs in order to walk fully in their purpose. When you understand that the age difference stops being the central question, it stops being the thing that needs to be explained or defended. It becomes what it actually is: context, the background against which a specific kind of complementarity becomes possible, not the point of the connection, just the container in which the point is taking shape. Here is what you have misunderstood, and I say this not as criticism, but as what needs to be brought into the light. You have been treating the age difference as a problem that requires a solution, something that must be justified before the connection can be taken seriously. And so you have been carrying the weight of that justification with you, trying to construct arguments for why this might be acceptable, why it might be explainable, why it might not be as unusual as it looks. But you were never supposed to be arguing for it. You were supposed to be discerning it. These are not the same thing. Arguing for something means you have already decided and are looking for evidence. Discernment means you are examining honestly and following what the evidence actually shows. The difference is the posture, and the posture you have been in, the defensive one, the one that anticipates objection and prepares a response, has been exhausting you, because it is not the right posture for this moment. The right posture is this: what is actually here? What does this connection produce when I look at it honestly? What does it ask me to become? What does it make possible that was not possible before? What kind of fruit has it shown me, even in its early stages? Those questions will tell you more than any explanation you could construct for someone else. The chosen ones who appear in the story of faith are not chosen because they fit the conventional picture. They are chosen because they carry something specific that God intends to use in a specific way. The choosing does not make them superior to anyone. It makes them accountable for what they have been given. It places on them the responsibility to be faithful stewards of what heaven has entrusted to their care. That is the reframing that matters here. You are not someone who has stumbled into an unusual situation that needs to be explained. You are someone who has been entrusted with a specific kind of connection that carries specific responsibility. And the responsibility is not to make the connection look acceptable to people who do not have the context to understand it. The responsibility is to hold what you have been given with integrity. What does that integrity look like in practical terms? It means you do not use divine assignment as a reason to bypass your own discernment. Just because something feels significant does not mean it exempts you from careful examination. It means the careful examination matters more, not less. Being entrusted with something sacred increases your accountability to handle it well, not your freedom to handle it carelessly. It means you keep asking the real questions, not can I defend this, but is this fruit good? Not will people understand, but are we both becoming more of who we are called to be through this? Not does this feel right, because feelings are not the final authority, but does this hold up over time when I look at it with full honesty? It also means you recognize the weight that comes with the difference in where you each stand. You carry more context, you carry more formation, and with that comes a responsibility not to use what you carry as leverage over the person who is younger and less formed in certain ways. Their openness is a gift. It is not an invitation to shape them into what is useful to you. Honoring what heaven has aligned means treating the other person with the kind of care that allows them to continue becoming fully themselves, not becoming a version of themselves that revolves around you. That last point is not incidental. It is central to whether this connection is what it could be, or whether it becomes something smaller and more complicated than heaven intended. But here is what the revelation ultimately gives you. You are released from the frame that has been keeping you in the posture of apology. You do not have to apologize for what you carry. You do not have to make the age difference the first thing you address in every conversation about this relationship. You do not have to construct a case for why this is acceptable. You are accountable, yes, but accountability is not the same as being on trial. The frame was never about age, it was always about assignment. And you have been assigned something that requires your full wisdom, your full humility, and your full willingness to steward it well. That is the weight and the gift of it, not superiority, not certainty. Responsibility and the freedom that responsibility, when carried rightly, actually contains. Understanding something and actually living from it are not the same thing, and the distance between those two positions is exactly where most people get stuck. They receive a revelation, they feel the weight and the release of it, and then they walk back into their ordinary day and find that nothing has materially changed. The questions are still there. The people who would raise objections are still there. The fear of getting it wrong is still there. And slowly the clarity that felt real in one moment begins to feel theoretical again. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice, not as a collection of abstract principles, but as a set of real choices you will need to make. The first and perhaps most important is this: stop looking for permission in the wrong places. There is a version of discernment that gets misused where we take our genuine questions to people we have already identified as the audience who will tell us what we want to hear. We frame it as accountability when what we are actually doing is looking for the validation we have not yet given ourselves. And there is a flip side to that, equally unhelpful: taking a connection to people who do not have the spiritual context or maturity to engage with it honestly, and then allowing their discomfort to become our primary data point. The people around you will have opinions. Some of those opinions will be well-intentioned. Some will be rooted in their own fears and assumptions. A few will come from people who have actually walked through seasons that give them genuine wisdom to offer. Learn to distinguish those voices and go to the third category when you need outside perspective, not to the first or second. The second practical reality is this: evaluate by fruit and do it over time. One conversation that leaves you feeling seen is not sufficient evidence. One moment of ease is not a confirmation of divine design. Neither, by the way, is one moment of difficulty a disconfirmation. Relationships of any real substance will produce both. What matters is the overall trajectory. Are you both moving towards something better as a result of what is developing between you? Is honesty increasing over time or decreasing? Is there a growing capacity for each of you to be fully present, or is the connection beginning to demand that one of you become less? Those questions can only be answered by watching over a sustained period, which means the practical instruction is not to rush. Not because slowness is somehow more spiritual than movement, but because what you are looking for requires time to become visible. Third, keep your own life intact. One of the patterns that people who carry deep relational wounds fall into is the collapse of self into connection. When something finally arrives that feels right after a long season of absence, there is a natural pull to reorganize everything around it, to make the relationship the center, to let the other person become the primary lens through which you experience your own worth and your own direction. This feels like love. It is actually a form of avoidance, a way of not having to keep doing the harder work of being a whole person independently. Divine alignment does not ask you to disappear into it. It asks you to bring yourself, your full-formed, continuing self, into genuine exchange with another person who is doing the same. The connection is not meant to be the container of your identity. It is meant to exist alongside your identity, serving something larger than either of you individually. Keep your spiritual practices. Keep your friendships that have nothing to do with this relationship. Keep your sense of calling and purpose that existed before this person came into view. And give the person you are building toward the same space. Do not allow what is forming between you to consume their own sense of self and direction either. Fourth, and this one is uncomfortable but necessary. Be willing to find out that you are wrong. Not because the connection is wrong, but because genuine discernment requires that you remain genuinely open to all the evidence, not just the evidence that confirms what you already feel. If this is real, it will hold up under honest examination. You do not need to protect it from scrutiny. You need to bring scrutiny to it and trust that what is real will remain real when you look at it directly. There will come a moment, it may already be here, where you will feel the pressure to decide. Not from God, but from the situation itself, from the other person's own needs and timeline, from the discomfort of sustained uncertainty. And in that moment, the temptation will be to either move too quickly to end the uncertainty or to retreat entirely because the risk feels too large. Neither of those is the right answer. The right answer is to stay in the process of honest examination, continuing to make the small, faithful choices that either build or reveal what this actually is, and trusting that the clarity you need will arrive in time for the choice that actually matters. The season is changing. You can feel it. But a changing season still requires the one tending it to show up and do the work. Faith does not exempt you from that work. It empowers you for it. You have come a long way in this conversation, not just through what has been said, but through what you have been willing to sit with while it was being said. That willingness is not nothing. It is actually the thing that makes everything else possible. So let's arrive somewhere, not at a conclusion that ties everything neatly, not at a promise that removes all uncertainty, but at a place where you can stand with your feet on real ground and make a real choice. The central question you came here carrying is what I am feeling actually from God, or am I looking for spiritual language to explain something that is simply what I want? That question does not have a once and for all answer that arrives from outside you. It has an answer that emerges from the ongoing practice of honest examination, from watching the fruit, from being willing to keep looking even when looking is uncomfortable. But here is what you now know that you did not fully have language for before. You know that the way heaven builds a connection is not organized around the criteria the world gave you. It is organized around calling, around what each person carries and what each is equipped to receive. Around the specific complementarity that allows two people to produce something together that neither could produce alone. And you know that the age difference, the thing you have been trying to explain and defend and justify, is not actually the question. It never was. It was the frame that kept you from seeing the real question clearly. The real question is about integrity, not whether this connection looks acceptable to people who are not living your life, but whether you are willing to hold it with the kind of care it deserves if it is what you believe it might be. Whether you are willing to examine it with full honesty rather than selective attention. Whether you are willing to enter it, if you enter it as the full and formed person you are, with your wisdom and your wounds and your boundaries and your continuing responsibility to keep becoming who you are called to be. Chosen ones are not people who get to bypass the ordinary requirements of faithfulness. They are people who are held to those requirements more fully, not less. The capacity you have been given, the depth and the discernment that came out of long and difficult seasons, that is not a badge of special status. It is a resource you have been trusted to steward. And part of stewarding it well is refusing to bring a careless version of yourself into something this significant. So the climactic choice, and there is one even if it does not feel dramatic, is this. You can continue letting the noise from outside and the residue from the past be the loudest voices in the room. You can keep building the case for and against, cycling through the same questions without moving toward any kind of resolution, waiting for a certainty that will never fully arrive before movement is required. That is a choice. It is understandable, but it is not discernment. It is avoidance wearing the costume of wisdom. Or you can choose to bring your whole self to this, not recklessly, not by abandoning the questions, but by deciding that you are capable of walking in faith while the questions are still present. By deciding that the work of honest examination is something you are willing to do in motion rather than standing still. By deciding that what you carry, all of it, the depth and the wisdom and the woundedness and the hope, is worth bringing into something real, handled with care, open to being corrected by evidence and not requiring the approval of everyone watching. That is not a decision to be made once and then set aside. It is a practice. The choice to walk forward in faith while remaining genuinely discerning is one you will make repeatedly in small moments and large ones as what is developing between you continues to reveal itself. And as you walk, some things will become clearer. You will see fruit, or you will see its absence. You will feel peace deepen, or you will feel unease that is not residue but genuine signal. The clarity you need will arrive not all at once but incrementally through the process of being present and paying attention. What has shifted in you through this conversation is real. The wound has been named and is beginning to be seen differently. The pattern has been identified. The criteria that actually matter have been clarified. The responsibility of what being entrusted with this means has been accepted, and the choice to keep walking forward with honesty and wisdom that has been made or is being made right now. Anointed One, you are not behind, you are not too late. The season ahead of you is genuinely new, not a repeat of what came before, not the same territory with different faces. Something in what is forming is actually different, and you have arrived at this moment not despite everything you have carried, but because of it. Every season of testing, every moment of choosing depth over ease, every time you stayed honest when it would have been simpler not to, that was preparation. This is what it prepared you for. Walk forward, not because everything is certain, not because there is no more risk, but because you have been given wisdom, and wisdom was meant to be walked in, not stored. The new season is here, the ground is ready, and who you have become through the waiting is exactly who is needed for what comes next. If this word has moved something in, you carry it into your day. And if you know someone else who is walking through a similar kind of threshold, share it. That is how things built for purpose continue to multiply. Go in peace. Go with discernment, and go with the full assurance that the care that brought you this far has not finished working.